to another Britflicks.com podcast. My name's Stuart Wright, and today's guest is Colin McCracken. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much indeed, Stuart. It's lovely to be with you this evening.
If I introduce you how I understand what you do, and then you can correct me and or fill in the blanks. So I know you as the host of Gothic Book Club, which I saw through Instagram. And you've also got a Substack sort of going into more detail about that stuff. And for me, as I see you, if this is not too bold a thing to put on you, I just see you as a champion of the weird and the eerie in literature. And every time I see one of your videos about a book you're focusing on, I feel like you're one of the best adverts for just books themselves, let alone Gothic. You give a life to what the pleasures are of reading that's really sort of infectious, is how I see what you do.
That's amazing. I'm so glad it comes across that way, because that's definitely how it's intended, and that's very much an accurate and very complimentary introduction. So for that, I thank you very much. Yep, I am indeed. I don't know. Is it book blogger, bookstagrammer? I'm not sure. Either way, I've been sort of enthusiastically talking and writing about culture in different forms for almost 20 years now. Okay. So since the early sort of Netscape days of the internet, there was always some form of website or blog or place that I was contributing to in some way. That kind of took a bit of a back seat the last couple of years, and I really missed it. And I just, for a short period, I started doing little to-camera pieces, very short introductions to some of my favorite books. And then it turned out I have a lot more books than I thought I did initially. So those conversations grew, as did the interactions. And through that, it's just been a great way to connect and I guess discover a part of the internet, and this is quite rare today, that is largely positive and supportive, engaged, and open. I mean, there's drama and stuff, but it's easier to avoid than in some, I guess, microcosms or ecosystems of fandom. And to me, that's equally interesting and entertaining, I have to say.
No, I mean, I mean, one of the reasons I started this podcast was along those lines. It just felt like a way to network in a way that I couldn't do sat in my office in East London. It isn't possible to do what we're doing now just by doing nothing at all. But by creating the artifice of a podcast interview and then a format, you suddenly have a dialogue, and suddenly, you're talking to hundreds of people, which is kind of surreal.
That's really nice. It's really nice indeed. I very much felt the same. I suppose between, say, 2006 and I suppose 2017, 2018, I was very much involved in culture journalism, particularly film journalism.
Okay.
So, sort of similar to that, I would go to a lot of film festivals and meet people, and you'd be doing interviews on the circuit, or you would be meeting just filmmakers or organizers and programmers, and it was just such a way to connect with like-minded, equally passionate folks. And I have to say, I completely understand the appeal on that side, especially doing it the way you are in sort of longer form conversations, but with a specific structure. I always really like that. And with that in mind, I feel we should probably segue to some recommendations very soon.
Yeah. So to give people a flavour as to what Gothic Book Club is, and I'll put links in the show notes so people can click on them at their leisure once they've found this podcast. But do you want to run through some key Gothic titles from your point of view?
Oh, I'd love to. So yeah, with the Gothic Book Club, what we're trying to do is open up an area of literature that might seem a little bit oblique to some people. It might seem a little bit academic or impenetrable or a little bit dusty in certain scenarios. But I think for me, the Gothic is such a broad-ranging sensibility that it spans much more than what people may initially take it to be. And that's why it's so ultimately engaging for me. It's an endlessly fascinating, and also that was written in the 2014, I think, or 2013, and or sorry, 2005. And you would find similarities, between the two, spanning hundreds and hundreds of years. But there are tropes and techniques that echo between those ages. And so for me, that's why Gothic is such a passion of mine and something I love to share and speak about with people. So with the Gothic Book Club, we started off pretty heavy with some sort of fairly expansive titles, and we have some interesting ones coming up in the next year or so. But I thought today, rather than sort of picking things from the specific list, I'd love to talk about just a few of my favorite Gothic novels, in no particular order. Excellent. So I mentioned 1796, and that was no coincidence, because that was when Matthew Lewis published The Monk, sometimes known as The Monk, a Romance. Now, there are a couple of really good cinematic adaptations of this, because I know this is a film podcast, so I think that the majority of the books I've been discussing will have associations with cinema as well. So with The Monk, there's a pretty decent version starring Vincent Cassel, and it's basically about a very popular, like a rock star monk. This guy who's going out, he was just delivering sermons, and people are passing out and just absolutely frantic for the way that he spreads the good word. But he falls afoul of temptation and the desires of the flesh, shall we say. And this leads him into a supernatural tryst. And I don't want to give too much away, but it's very much the archetype of a lot of, sort of Faustian narratives that we've seen over the years, that deal with the devil, that jump into ultimate degradation. And to come from such a religious figure, it's really well done. And you read it now, and there are still really shocking revelations within the plot. There are incredibly visceral and brutal, violent elements to it as well. Like, this is a gorehound's dream. If they take the time to get through the narrative, the rewards are there. Like the finale of it is still incredibly gruesome. 250 odd years later.
And I was reading that. It feels like Jodorowsky's Dune that Louis Buñuel was trying to make it in 1960 and just run out of money, I think, in the end.
That's it. It's just this very affecting, very engaging story. The origin of the evil character named Elvira as well. So a nice point of note for horror fans too. The Monk is definitely worth the time. It's worth the investment, and there's some great audiobooks. I think Simon Vance does one of the audiobooks, and it's really well delivered. And that's something I really recommend to people who are eager to explore sort of older literature, or what they perceive to be more challenging literature. Grab an audiobook version and test the waters with that. Get used to the language, the narrative, the flow, and if you have to, get an audiobook and a hard copy, because then you'll sync them up in your mind, and it'll become more of an accessible entity than just this, as I said, sort of dusty or academic blocker that you can't really get past.
What are the titles have you got in your sort of key titles that you'd like to sort of highlight for people?
I'm going to jump to 1820 now, and this is a real oddity. Like a lot of people know The Monk, a lot of sort of curriculums would cover it, but the next one is by an actual man of the cloth named Charles Maturin, and he was based in Ireland, and he wrote a very salacious, very scandalous, and magnificent horror novel called Melmoth the Wanderer. And the premise is very simple. Melmoth is a man who is cursed to eternity, and he's in this state of immortality, an immense personal torment, and he can relieve himself of this curse and pass it on to somebody else, but they have to agree to do so. So as a result, this SOB just shows up when people are having the worst time of their lives. Like literally, the plague has hit the house. Everybody's dropping. Your daughter's being taken away to a nunnery. All this sort of terrible, terrible stuff. And then Melmoth will sort of knock on the door, going, "Hey, things are pretty tough right now. Might have a solution for that." And it's about how all of these different stories come together. But it's fantastic because it's not only so well delivered and structured, and it's engaging, it's funny, it's violent. But there is also like one huge section of it which just completely rips off another novel almost verbatim in parts, like really blatantly so. And this is brilliant. Like this is this is the tea from the early 1820s, when everyone in the sort of pre-celebrity days. But Maturin almost word for word, beat for beat, rips off Denis Diderot, the French philosopher and writer's novel The Nun, for one of the segments, which is about a girl whose father sort of pushes her off to a convent where she's fairly brutalized. It's a very unpleasant, very tragic story. And Maturin was like, yeah, I like that. I'm going to stick it in here. Sort of in the center part of the book. Obviously, the church didn't respond very well to this because it's he was obviously out in the west of Ireland in his little vicarage or whatever, and he was a pretty horny dude by what we can gather, from the story. So this didn't go down well with the clergy at all. And he was removed from his post fairly quickly and demoted, I believe, quite significantly. But Maturin is definitely one to explore. He's one of the lesser known of the Gothic writers, and a little uncelebrated because I feel his use of narrative and approach has been greatly adopted since.
Okay.
And I could almost say the same for my next author as well. And this is a real, oh my gosh, this one blew my mind. This is a book by a guy called William Hope Hodgson. It was written in 1908, and it's called The House on the Borderland. House on the Borderland. And this is just a proto-psychedelic masterpiece. Alan Moore wrote a fantastic introduction to a revised edition, which is available through Swan River Press. They're a small independent publishing house in Ireland, and they do great work at unearthing all of these old treasures by Bram Stoker and Sheridan Le Fanu, and they celebrate a lot of great underrepresented writers from history, particularly books written by women over the last 200 years or so. And they're all sort of tangentially horror or gothic or uncanny or occult. So very, very interesting avenue to explore. So again, Alan Moore is a big celebrant of this book, and I guess there's an Alan Moore seal of approval, isn't there? I mean,
H.P. Lovecraft was a fan, and
big fan,
and apparently Terry Pratchett, that was his big bang moment into being a fan of sci-fi and fantasy, was reading that book.
That is very true. That is very true, and all Lovecraft can be a bit questionable sometimes, but you can't argue with the fiction. The fiction is great. And Pratchett and Moore, that's a good gang to be in, really. If they're coming out and going, yeah, this is it. And you can see why, because it's set in the west of Ireland, in this very desolate part of the west of Ireland, near the Burren. Kind of looks like the moon. It's got all these like limestone flat surfaces, and it's a really bizarre place. And I lived literally within walking distance from William Hope Hodgson's house, where this all came together. He lived in the sort of vicarage beside the local church there, where his family were sent on missionary work, which basically meant convert the heathen locals, for want of a better expression. So they obviously didn't have a great time. They were given a bit of a hard time by the locals, and I feel that influenced the book to a great degree, because it's about this fellow and his friend, and they're in this old house in the country in the west of Ireland, and they're sort of discover this journal, the way all good horror movies start. and they start working their way through this piece of literature, and it basically conjures up this massively fragmented psychedelic experience with, crazy pig people and all this sort of stuff. It's literally like in those old cartoons when you see someone like opening a castle turret door and just stepping into this like animated atmosphere. It's incredibly fun.
What do you think is fueling that sort of that? I mean, psychedelia. I mean, we don't own it as a 20th century word, but it feels like something that's born out of modern pop culture, not something that the start of the 20th century.
Yeah, completely. And it actually, because it was 1908, it sort of predates the fascination of spiritualism, which would have been like, I guess it's crosses over a little bit with it. I think what fueled a lot of novels at that particular time was science. Okay. And the development of science and the sort of analysis of the world in a way in which it had not been assessed before, because everything was so tied into religion for so long. Like every worldview or world theory was associated with some sort of dogmatic or religious view. And for the first time, science was really getting the sort of kudos and attention it warranted. And I think this was fertile ground for writers to just go wild with. I mean, as you said, Lovecraft was a big fan, particularly the I think it's called The Wreck of the Glencarrig, is one of his books. Also Carnacki, The Ghost Finder, is a great one by Hodgson. Like just a really good dude. Read into it. There's a great passage. I don't know if you know the book. There's a writer, contemporary English writer called Edward Parnell, who wrote a fantastic book called Ghostland, In Search of a Haunted Country. Cannot recommend this enough. It's think of psychogeography mixed with a family memoir and a comprehensive history of all the best horror movies and books you've never heard of.
Jesus
Christ. Absolutely brilliant stuff. The audiobook's great. He's online, he's on Twitter and stuff. He's a super nice guy. I used to interact with him a little bit when I was still on Twitter. And highly recommended. So Ghostland, In Search of a Haunted Country by Edward Parnell. And that's where you'll find out a lot more about William Hope Hodgson and how he started a fight with Harry Houdini. And I'll leave that as the cliffhanger for that one.
Now you're gonna take us into the 21st century for your fourth example.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. It would be remiss not to mention this book because, if we're going to jump into films that have changed my life and influenced my life in a great way, and I think this is the key book that showed me a whole new aspect to reading. Really? And this is going back, completely. I think it originally came out in 2005. I didn't pick up a copy till like 2008, maybe 2009, whenever the English translation came out.
I was going to say, it's 2004 in Spain, and then it's 2008, the end of 2008 in USA, and then 2009 UK. So I don't know. That
sounds about right. Late 08, early 09 sounds about right in terms of picking it up. So I remember I was carrying that brick around for ages. It's a hefty book. It's about 1,100 pages or 1,200 pages, and I don't know if I'd read anything that big before.
It scares me just by thinking about it. I mean, that's one of the...
Yeah, I suppose one way to look at it is it was originally supposed to be 5 books. So Bolaño wanted to publish these as a series of books. And then he very tragically passed away at the age of 50, 20 years ago last month, I believe. Just
does it read that way then? Does it read like 5 books, or does it?
Well, so I'll mention what the book is first of all. So the book that we're referring to, I know we just started diving into the author, but that's very easy to do. So the book is 2666, which I refer to as 2666 because he does talk about it as a year in a different book called Amulet. So 2666 by Roberto Bolaño, and I first heard of this. It was through Chuck Palahniuk. He used to have a great blog back in the 2000s, the Fight Club author of Haunted, Survivor. He used to have a great blog. And I was a miserable sod for most of my 20s. And I remember he posted this blog saying, "This is the most depressing book ever written." And I was like, I'm in. sign me up. He's like, it's nearly 1,200 pages of misery. I was like, send it, hook it into my veins. So I read it, and I was surprised that no, it wasn't depressing in the way that it had been described. And I think that was a real misnomer. I think that was actually kind of a reductive way to look at it. What I discovered was a style of literature I'd never encountered before. It was exploratory, it was informative, it was historical, it was academic, it was terrifying, it was thrilling, it was so repetitive and horrific in parts. There's one section of one of the books literally just describes murders and bodies being found over and over and over again. And it's all to do with the ongoing disappearance and murder of women in an area on the borders in Mexico, factory workers, low-income people. And this is really, it's an ongoing problem, and it's something that's still happening to this day. And the way Bolaño describes it in the novel, it's like reading endless police reports, and it just wears you down in a way that I'd never experienced with literature. And I watched a lot of extreme cinema and stuff as a kid, and as a young man, and watched a lot of documentaries and thought I was pretty infallible to this. But this hit me emotionally in a way that very few books have done ever since. And Bolaño was always swimming around in my mind somewhere. And seeing his influence on contemporary Latin American literature, like people like Noña Fernandez, or to a degree, even Mariana Enriquez, both fantastic writers. It's amazing to see, the sort of next generation who are taking like little peppered moments from him. But 2666 by Roberto Bolaño, his more famous novel is The Savage Detectives, which I like, but not as much.
Okay. Well, look, thank you for sharing that and to give the listener an introduction into the Gothic Book Club. I will put links in the show notes, like I say, so people can find you on Instagram and TikTok. Thank you very much. But let us now move into 3 films that have impacted everything in your adult life. I will quickly just run through the rules, just for listeners just arrived. Colin's given me 3 titles. We'll do each one. But we won't just talk about them forever. We're going to have a clock ticking on us. We get 5 minutes per film. And when the alarm goes off, we will move on to the next film. It's not a strict thing, but it's just more of a kind of keeping us in check more than anything else. Right then, first off the bat, we've got 1950 Henry Costa with Harvey, starring James Stewart. Do you want to tell us where that fits in and how that impacts on you?
I will indeed. And even though this is audio, please know that I'm smiling just at the mention of Harvey, starring James Stewart. And that's why I think there are a few pieces of art or literature or film that you'll experience through your life that you carry with you like a genuine piece of light inside. And for me, man, that's Harvey. I know a lot of people's go-to with James Stewart is It's a Wonderful Life. And no shade on It's a Wonderful Life. It's a great film. But for me, there's just something about Elwood P. Dowd. He's such a magnificent protagonist. And for those who haven't seen it, Harvey is the story of a man from a fairly wealthy family who's a little bit of an outcast, a little bit of an outsider. You get the impression that he's had quite a successful life, but it's not worked out quite so well. There's aspects of, obviously, mental health issues, of alcoholism, of all of these different things. And his best friend, who he's accompanied by, is a giant invisible rabbit by the name of Harvey. And it's such a sweet film. It really is. As I said, just the way that those issues are all dealt with is so sensitive and charming, and it's just got such a wonderful central message. And I guess for me personally, James Stewart is, I would say one of the people who, I guess, impacted me quite young, because you just kind of want to be more like James Stewart and find more people like him in the world as well. There's a great quote in the film where Elwood P. Dowd says that My mother always used to say Elwood, and she would always call me Elwood. She said, in this world, you can either be oh so smart or oh so clever, or sorry, oh so smart or oh so pleasant. Um, for years, I was smart, and I recommend pleasant. And I just think that's such a beautiful way to look at life. That you can either be right, you can be great, you can be all of these things, or you can just try and be nicer. And I think for me, that's a beautiful thing. It's something I think of often. And yeah, James Stewart was just such a sweetheart, and I think it's a perfect rainy day Sunday afternoon. And I think
it's a film. It's a film that I've seen lots of times, but not paid a lot of attention to in terms of like elements to it. Like I was reading about it today, and the idea that the White Rabbit is somehow from Celtic folklore blew my mind. I'd not really. I know he says it in the film, but what it's called, but I never really sort of thought about it that way. It just it's just such an absurd image that and the joke about he can see it, no one else can see it is all that I've really in some senses.
That's it. It's based on the Irish concept of a puka. So Puca in Irish, or I think it's spelled Pooka, possibly in the film or the script. But yeah, that was it. Like Mary Chase, who wrote the play, she was well up on that kind of thing. And James Stewart, of course, did the play on Broadway for years as well.
Interestingly, he did the play before the film. He did a week when the guy was on holiday. The guy was playing it was on his vacation. And so for prep, he did a week of it. And then 20 years later, he was on Broadway doing it.
That's amazing. I would love to have seen that.
And my other little snippet that I found out is that somebody says 6 foot rabbit, and he says 6'3.5". Let's deal with facts, as he says. And in fact, James Stewart is 6'4", and the rabbit in the film is 6'8". But the line is from the play, and they never changed it.
That's amazing. I really like that. I didn't know that. Thank you for sharing.
That's my
excellent
pleasure.
Stuff. So yeah, that's Harvey. Definitely one to dive into, and I think
perfect timing. Right then, moving swiftly along into the 70s for Nick Rogue's masterpiece from 1973, Don't Look Now. Where are you seeing this first time? What's the impact this has on you?
I'm seeing this far too young, and the impact is immeasurable. But Don't Look Now is, to me, one of a handful of perfect films, and I think having seen it regularly over the space of like 25 plus years and watching it at different stages, from like adolescent, young adult, to someone who's comfortably approaching middle age additions. If you watch Don't Look Now as someone who's very young, you're responding to the overtly horrific elements. You're responding to the sort of ascending sense of fear that Rogue created within that film. And it's every bit as visually rich as a Suspiria or as an Argento film or something like that. But he just gets the sort of terrifying bits nailed down so well in a visual sense.
Yeah.
I think as you get older, you start to connect more with the experience of Donald Sutherland and Julie Christie, because obviously the fear of losing a child is one of the biggest things that any parent would have. I think as you get older and you experience grief and you experience loss and you experience all of those things that, accumulate with our extended time on Earth.
It's a film that really shows you how you can never be prepared for it, and you can be that loving couple as they are, and the idea of a child dying, which is a hand grenade into your life, really, and to show them just going in two different directions, and it just basically pulling the love apart, basically, in many ways.
Completely. And Rogue goes in hard, like those opening scenes, which depicts, I hope we can,
Yes, I
I
think
hope
we
we can
can.
share a few plot points, without being too spoilery. Obviously it's about a couple dealing with the loss of their child, and that is shown pretty graphically in the opening segment of the film. And there's a moment with Donald Sutherland cradling the body of his daughter, and the grief is palpable. It's just a masterful performance. And I mean, Donald Sutherland, just he always knocks it out of the park. Like, he can turn up in the worst Stephen King adaptation and give it some legs, But if you really want to see Donald Sutherland in something else magnificent, if you're a fan of his sort of offbeat stuff from like MASH or Kelly's Heroes or whatever, definitely check out a film called Alex in Wonderland. A really offbeat, like, oh man, it's one of my favorites, and Donald Sutherland is just so great in it. But that's for another episode. So we'll circle back to Don't Look Now for a minute. Obviously, the story, was based on a short story that was only released a couple of years beforehand by Daphne du Maurier, who famously wrote Rebecca, Jamaica Inn, The Birds, all of these magnificent foundational narrative elements that were taken on by these great directors over the years. And I really think Rogue connected with that story in a way that very few directors do, because he actually elevated it. He took the concept, he took the story, and he made something even richer and grander from it. But Don't Look Now is just such a fascinating exploration into grief, and one of the earliest, were they actually getting up to what they're getting up to in some of the more intimate scenes? There was a lot of speculation over that for many years as well. But absolutely superb movie, visually beautiful, terrifying, heartbreaking, unforgettable. And I think the way that's impacted my life is that, solidification of needing something enriching and valuable from the culture that I connect with. And that's really what Don't Look Now does. It sort of addresses a richer desire for narrative and visual satisfaction.
And I love the way that two people can be a believer and a non-believer and almost go in the opposite directions on those fundamentals in their life through the grief. Like what?
And I love that.
Someone looking for answers will find belief, and someone who doesn't understand why they're being punished loses their faith and belief. It's like, I mean, that's right. It is such a rich telling of a story, because these are internal things, and to be able to get that across visually in a film is a really powerful thing to do. And we're out of time on Don't Look Now.
That's it. Check it out. It's you won't regret it. It's a good one.
And for your final choice, we're going to jump into the video nasty era of 1980, right smack at the start of it all. And certainly from a British point of view, I don't know, was Ireland under the spell of video nasties in the early 80s?
Well, we suffered from very heavy film censorship for a very, very long time, right up into the 2000s.
Okay.
You couldn't get Exorcist or Chainsaw Massacre here up until the late 90s. It was fairly heavy on that front. So there was a period during the 80s when you could get the sort of the wash of horror that came through. But then it got really cleaned up and sanitized during the 90s. So very similar to the UK in that respect.
Okay. Well, that was my long-winded way round of introducing The Boogeyman from 1980, written, produced, and directed by, is it Uli Lommel or Lommel?
Uli Lommel. Yeah, Uli Lommel. And I've chosen this not because it's the best horror film or even because it's the best video nasty, but it was definitely a film that influenced my life in a big way.
So where are you seeing this, and who are you seeing it with first time round?
I first saw it as part of my, teenage mission to get everything off the DPP video nasties list and watch them all, not even in succession, but just to get them all.
Yeah.
I suppose that's what we did before Pokemon, wasn't it? We talked to dodgy men with vans about acquiring very fuzzy 4th gen VHS rips of unwatchable movies. I saw it as part of like my early years were just, it was horror, from kind of the late 80s, early 90s onwards. And I saw it and I didn't think much of it And then about 10 years ago, I was working, I was writing for a lot of horror magazines. I was working on a couple of, film bits and pieces.
Yeah.
And somebody got in touch and they basically said, oh, we want you to work on a Boogeyman remake. And I was like, all right. And I ended up working with Uli Lamel for years on a number of projects that never materialized. Traveled the world with him, had a ton of fun, and got an insight into what a true... I mean, Uli was a punk rock genius. He was great. Like, he's lambasted for all of these terrible Lionsgate serial killer films that he made. But when you hear the stories behind it, it was like, right, so that's why it didn't work out, But Uli was brilliant, very, very sorely missed. He passed away in 2018. And, like 2017. Gosh, the years are getting on. But yeah, The Boogeyman is a film with a rich and interesting history. It's got some great surrealist imagery, the sort of the S&M themed killer coming to life in the mirror. It's got John Carradine chewing a lot of scenery, and the wonderful Susanna Love, who was Uli's wife at the time. Boogeyman 2 warrants a mention as well, because he got given a ton of money to make a follow-up, and made a follow-up of basically him and his butler having endless conversations of why they don't want to make Boogeyman 2, and then just cut loads of the first film into it. And
I believe so.
It's remarkable, great fun. But yeah, Uli was a huge factor in my life for many, many years, as I said, creatively and professionally.
So when you say work on it with him, what were you doing? What work was you doing with Uli?
Well, I wrote a remake for him, for starters. I wrote a subsequent TV show for him. I was on set for most of the Boogeyman remake. Went all of the pre-prod stuff with the TV show and a whole load of other bits and pieces. I think I wrote maybe 8 scripts for him over the course of the time we were working to. So really hammering it out, and it was great. It was a magnificent experience.
So how do your two ships pass each other in the night and become collaborators?
Well, I was working on a film, which also never materialized. This happens way more often than I initially thought.
I know. I'm a screenwriter. I know exactly.
Oh, right. So you know the pain.
Yes.
I was working on a film called The Profane Exhibit. I don't know if it ever came out, but this had a whole load of genre directors involved, like Ruggero Deodato and Nacho Dongo and all of these people. I'm not sure if I pronounced his name right. It's 10 years ago. I can't remember all of the details. But this was put together by this, I'm going to say a Walter Mitty figure, to be generous.
There's a lot of them in the film industry.
There's quite a number of them. Yeah, I've met quite a few. So... yeah, this guy basically, I'll keep this brief. He was sending me off on all these wild goose chases with projects. And one day he calls me up and says, look, I've got Uli Lamel on the phone. He wants to, he needs a script writer. And I thought you'd be a good fit for it. So he put me forward to it and I wrote him something. I never heard from him for like 6 months. And I wrote back and I said, hi, Uli, did you like it? And he was like it? We shot it. Come and see. We're in the editing room. And that's how Boogeyman tied in with everything else. So we'll wrap that one up there.
Well, look, thank you very much for sharing your the 4 books that sort of introduce as an introduction to the Gothic Book Club, and your 3 films, HARVEY, Don't Look Now, and The Boogeyman. And it just gives me to say thank you very much for joining us on the Britflicks podcast.
It's been my pleasure, Stuart. Thank you very much indeed. And looking forward to listening back in to future episodes as well. So thanks once again for having me.